I knew you'd appreciate it. Hello, everybody out there. This is the progress report for this historic 20th January of 2021. Historic. And I must say, thrilling and encouraging and revitalizing, all of that, because we just elected, we just brought into office, we elected some time ago, the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden of Delaware. I think he's the man that we needed at this time. And we elected a woman of color, a woman of South Asian descent, to be the highest ranking ever elected female in the history of the United States of America. Pretty awesome. And I'm just totally pumped about the whole thing. And I brought in a little prop, which I've left behind, but I'm going to go get it, Mike, because you'll like it. And so I just have to celebrate that a little bit. You know, Mike, there was a time when we used to, St. Patrick's Day, we got in some trouble. So this is the strict rules here, but this is going to be a virtual toast. A virtual toast. This is real champagne, but it's capped. Brendan, don't worry, I'm not breaking any rules. And I'm going to have a virtual toast to wish the health and the success of the new administration, which I'm just so excited about and so thrilled.
I'm with you, Bob. I am with you, and I'm here to tell you I have been asking people to pray for Joe Biden. There's a lot of negativity out there on the other side, and I just think that's not the way we want to go. He's our president. He's the right man. I think of the other times that he ran for president unsuccessfully, and it's almost like they were holding him back for when we needed him most.
That's right. I think that's right. He had a dismal experience in the New Hampshire primary this time. This is the third time he's run for president. Let's not forget that. Third time. But this time, placed fifth in New Hampshire primary, and before even the votes were counted, he was out of here. And then he came to South Carolina, where so many of the candidates I like go to die. But in that state, he revived. He revived with the enormous help of the very significant black population. Oh, we've got a caller already. Okay, I'll take the caller. And Jack, this is the progress report. I'm Bob Backus. We're happy to welcome you. You with us? Jack?
Yes.
Yeah, go right ahead. Have you got a quick question or comment? Because we got a guest to introduce.
Okay. I think the frosting on the cake was when they had the 3 Democrats being sworn in today. That was the frosting on the cake.
Yeah. You mean Joe Biden and the 2 senators from Georgia, right? That's what you mean by the 3?
Exactly. But before I go off, I just want to say, I watch a lot of these programs in Manchester on 23.
Yeah.
You Mark, bring so much class to TV. You don't badmouth people. You stay within the framework of political issues and policies like that. It's very unfortunate that we always thought Trump was the only guy that would be that way, but we've learned in this town there are other people that use the same type of media just to downgrade. And unfortunately, I was called Dingleberry, and I just asked him a point question. He ever explained that to his child, and the guy went crazy. So just stay classy and keep your show going. You had all your years are far better than the 21 he spent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. My God, I may have to have another drink.
Bob, please let me respond. Jack, my heart is warmed and uplifted. I don't think I've heard kinder words in a long time. Thank you, Jack. And, we will continue to do it the way we like to do it. We'll do it the right way.
Mike, I'm going to introduce Reverend Jason Wells, who's our guest for the hour.
Get to it! Our honored guest!
And we're delighted to have him here on this auspicious day. Jason, thank you so much for coming in and joining us. You may want to draw that microphone up a little closer to you.
I will do that just to make sure the audio is good, but thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Jason Wells is I guess you're the executive director, would that be your title?
That's correct, executive director.
Of an organization that I've often been pleased that we have in New Hampshire called the New Hampshire Council of Churches. And we have all different ideas of what our faith should be. God knows over history we've fought many wars of what our faith should be. It's shocking to think that was true, that we had Christians slaughter Christians for, really
Bob,
centuries.
You say was. It's continuing to this day.
What?
Sadly.
You planning to launch some sort of religious war I haven't heard about?
Well, I look at the Israelis and the Palestinians. I look at Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
Well,
there are religious wars being fought to this day.
Yep, religious wars indeed. And the second one you mentioned, indeed, was a war between Christian communities. One Catholic, one predominantly Catholic, one predominantly Protestant. Thank God we had the Good Friday Agreement, and the peace agreement holds. That gets into a whole bunch of problems with the Brexit, which is not the subject of this show.
I'd love to do a show on it, but let's put that aside.
We will do a show on that. That would be good. We can have my son in from London to talk about that again. But in any event, Jason, we have a new president. Thank God, and thank God he's safe and well. And he's a man of great faith by all measures. He is a deeply religious person, and only the second Catholic president of the United States, after the late John F. Kennedy. And it made me think that I think it's very appropriate we have you here today, because faith is such an important part of our life in this country. It has been since the very founding of it. And so I just want to, first of all, I'd like you to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us a bit about you, whether you're a New Hampshire guy through and through like I am, or you're an arrival, and how you happen to be running this organization instead of being a pastor in a church, because you are an ordained minister.
That's right. Yeah, I'd be happy to, Bob. So I'm Jason Wells. I'll address the most pressing question first, is that I am not a New Hampshire native. That's what most people need to know. I moved here in 2004. I was actually born and raised in Dallas, Texas. A very different part of the country in some ways, a very similar part of the country in other ways. But I grew up, I had gone to seminary in New Jersey and moved to New Hampshire in 2004, fresh out of seminary, and was ordained actually around the corner from here at Grace Episcopal Church in Manchester, where I served for 3 years.
My law office from so many years is right on that corner.
Yes, I remember. And then for 10 years I served a church in Concord, New Hampshire. But now I serve the New Hampshire Council of Churches, and have for the past a little over 3 years.
Yeah.
So the mission of the Council of Churches is that we have 9 different denominations as members. That includes a pretty diverse array of churches, but they are churches. So the American Baptists, Episcopalians like myself, Greek Orthodox, Lutherans, Methodists, Presbyterians, Quakers, the United Church of Christ, and as you mentioned before, the Unitarian Universalists. So it's a pretty broad range of churches. If you add up all together in New Hampshire, that adds up to close to 400 congregations in the state of New Hampshire, in all of our towns and cities.
Wow.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are major Christian churches. I guess the principal one would be the Roman Catholic Church that are not members, and there are obviously others that are not members. When you speak for the faith community, are you able to speak for, I assume you can't speak for anybody but the member churches, is that right? But how do you make sure that your agenda to advance the mission of Christianity and the message of Jesus Christ is not exclusive of any of these non-members?
Well, I see that we often sort of metaphor that I use a lot is the metaphor of a border. And I go to a story in the Bible about Jesus walking along the border of Israel and Samaria. There's a border there's a story he's walking along, and 10 lepers come to him. He heals the lepers, and one of them says thank you, and they all go away. But he's when you're on the border, that means you're in a unique place. You can serve people on both sides. You're not in one camp or the other. In many ways, my job is to be at the border of 9 different churches and denominations. I sort of am able to support and serve everyone. So you asked about policies or things that we come together to agree on. One of the major successes that we participated in the past few years was the repeal of the death penalty.
Oh,
And that's something that all 9 of these denominations, all 9 of these churches have official teachings that the death penalty is immoral and ought to be repealed wherever it is. And we're able to bring that voice as a council to organize those churches, to organize those people to come forward and speak with one voice to our state legislature. Mm-hmm. So it can be difficult, as you were alluding to before, between ideas like what's happened in the history of Ireland. It's hard to bring Christians together. Anyone who's a pastor knows, actually, the new Senator Raphael Warnock remarked that one of his skills that he will bring to the Senate is the ability to bring church members together. The people who like traditional music and the people who like gospel music, he brings them together. And that's a skill, to bring people you think who are irreconcilable and bring them together for one purpose. So we try to do that through the council and the churches that are there. But we also try our best to be on the border of many of our Christian churches and the other churches and non-Christian faiths in our state. So we do try to reach out to the Catholic Diocese of Manchester. We work with the non-denominational churches, some of the evangelical churches here sometimes, even though they're not part of our body. But we also foster good working relationships with the Jewish community of the state, with the Islamic community of the state, and beyond. So we try to be a point of contact so that Christians who are in our denominations have a way to reach out to the other faiths in an organized way.
Do you host?
Hey, Bob, can I jump in
yes, please,
as someone
please.
from perhaps a 10th denomination? There are a few things. I think the concept of faith and in particular denominations is very important on today's agenda. And I think what I'd like to focus on is something that I heard our guest say, and that is there is so much in common among the 9 denominations in his organization, and I would postulate even among the others that may not be. And our history, the history of faith, and quite frankly, the idea of denominations at all, is based on the differentiations, the things that we can argue about, as opposed to focusing on the things where we can come together. And I'd like to, with all due respect, I'd like to kind of turn the conversation in that direction a little bit, because I think that is the call letters for the day.
Well, it was the theme of the president's inaugural address, was it not? What you're saying was his theme, eloquently expressed.
I have a transcript of the wonderful poem recited by Amanda Gorman at the inauguration today, which beautifully articulated the reason why we need to find these common areas of understanding, because we have a hill to climb. We are on a journey. This country is an experiment. It's not an end point. It's always on the move. Yeah. We're approaching something better at all times. So I'd like to focus our conversation a little bit on the things that the churches in his organization have in common, and that might have the universals that we can all agree on.
Have you got a little piece of that poem you'd like to read for us? I thought that poem was absolutely stunning. 22-year-old young woman.
One piece that really struck out to me that I highlighted here, and it goes, quoting her, "We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent, bold, fierce, and free." And then she goes on, "But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright." That's the point.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. It's actually bringing tears to my eyes to hear you read that, Mike. And I heard her read it, and I think it was just absolutely stunning and a flawless inaugural ceremony. I mean,
really
where does a young woman of 22, coming from tough background, as so many people like her have, I mean, the command of the language, but the soul and the spirit. And there was a wonderful thing today, too, wasn't it, Jason, when President Biden in his inaugural address quoted from Lincoln as he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, "I do this with my whole soul."
Right.
And he said, I accept this responsibility with my whole soul. How beautiful is that? That must have just made your heart sing with joy.
I thought it was so touching today. I don't know Amanda Gorman. This is my introduction to her today.
Me too.
So I don't know her background at all.
But we'll be hearing more from her, for sure.
But we heard that depth of soul that makes your spirit resonate with the words she's saying. We heard Joe Biden, the president, speak of his whole soul being. It was a very soulful day.
It was a soulful day.
And there was something in that spiritual power, that calling power, that just reaches into us. It makes something deep in us resonate with our own values. Even if we have different faiths, we often have a very similar moral compass. And I think we all had that moral compass sort of aligned today. I know I had a colleague of mine from another church in the state who would speak of the calling power. He was thinking back to the calling power of JFK and RFK and MLK, and the way that they spoke to the soul and just sort of called us to something higher. And I think we've been hungry for that for a long time in this country, in our political vision. And I think we saw something of that today. We saw some hungry people being fed with that message today.
Yeah. Jason, let me ask you, what did you do to celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King? I mean, I so missed going to the Greek church ceremonies we've had here for years, you know? And I must say, I just kind of punted. I did not realize there was opportunities to participate. But what did you do, and what was it like?
Thank you. Yeah, great question. For a long time, I've gone to either the Greek church or now Temple Adath Yeshurun, the synagogue, Reformed synagogue in Manchester, have hosted the MLK celebrations, and I was a part of that again. The Council of Churches is one of the member organizations that puts that program on every year. So along with Veterans for Peace, American Friends Service Committee, NAACP, we're part of that organization. So actually part of my job leading up to King Day on Monday, I was the video editor. I can do a little bit of video editing, and now in the church world, because of the pandemic, all of our churches, all of our clergy are now amateur video producers. So we're all learning this skill very quickly.
They're already ahead of me here, Mike.
Yeah, you're gonna have to catch up, Bob. So we actually pulled together a virtual celebration. We actually worked with Manchester Public TV. We got copies of the recorded programs back to 2006, and we're able to bring some of our own past celebrations forward to honor the past recipients of MLK's award, to remember those who in our state are living King's legacy right now and have been. And we have plenty of new material as well. It was really a joy. We chose this year as our theme, love is greater than hate. Summarizing King's quote from several of his speeches, but especially "Where do we go from here" in 1967, where he says that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only the light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hatred, only love can do that. And we actually had, we pulled a quote from that, a long quote from that speech, and had people read it, and they sent us recordings of it. So Senator Shaheen, Senator Hassan, Representatives Pappas and Kuster, Mayor Craig sent us recordings, but also state representatives like Rennie Cushing. He had received the MLK Award here in 1989. And other young people from Change for Concord and YOU and other organizations all sent us in that being read. So it was wonderful to kick off that reading with Martin Luther King reading it, and then hearing a diverse array of people in New Hampshire reading it. And then they'll close that with King's voice again, that we see King's voice and his vision being spoken and lived every day in New Hampshire, and people are doing it, and we got to draw that together. It was a beautiful celebration. The video is actually online at MLKNH.org if you want to see that.
I will be really interested in checking out
MLKNH.org. Yeah.
That's really, really wonderful.
You know, Bob, if I can jump in again, I know I'm coming. You guys have a thing going in the studio, but I want to participate.
We want you to.
You know, the comment that I just heard, that New Hampshire lives what Martin Luther King was dreaming every day. You know, it is so true. And yet we were the last state to recognize the holiday in his honor, you know, and I got to wonder why we can't fully embrace that. What you know, what's the problem?
Well,
Jason, why do you think it took New Hampshire so long to come around? Because I agree with you. We are good people, and we embraced Martin Luther King's ideal in the 60s. But yet it took so long to honor him.
Mike, I don't want to be negative here, but I think the answer to that, more than anything, is a certain newspaper publisher long gone, a very powerful newspaper publisher who used to publish editorials on the front page of the Union Leader, but never lived in the state of New Hampshire, but told us all how to do. And he was a real opponent of Martin Luther King. I blessedly have forgotten most of his editorials, but the one I remember on the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated, his editorial on the front page was entitled "He Reaped the Whirlwind." He reaped the whirlwind.
Yeah, and
it was his own fault that he got killed. You know,
No,
I mean, I think that's the answer.
I remember Bill Loeb, but Bill Loeb had been long gone before we passed the holiday.
Well, his legacy was long. His legacy was long.
Passing the holiday.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see.
No, didn't mean to derail you.
No, that's excellent.
Well, I'd love to address that real quick.
Would you please?
Yeah, I think I moved to
Where did
New
we go
Hampshire.
wrong?
I moved to New Hampshire in 2004, so it was after that discussion was concluded.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've heard from people who were a part of that was that, especially later in King's life in 67 and 68, he spoke out so strongly against the Vietnam War. And that's right. Even people who had been half-hearted supporters or fair-weather supporters of King left him because he appeared to be speaking up for communism, right? And that sort of Cold War concern. And that is something that is still an effective argument. This past year, I loved seeing in New Hampshire the number of people who stood up for Black Lives Matter. There were actually churches that got involved in Black Lives Matter marches that I have never seen get involved on racial justice before. I was really excited to kind of cheer them along and encourage that, because there were some new faith people joining that. And but there was a turning back when very quickly the talking point came out that Black Lives Matter is Marxist. And as soon as we could call it communist, the fight for racial justice begins to recede. Yeah. And I think that is a major factor, and it's something I think we saw in the past conversations for racial justice, and we're seeing it again today.
Yeah.
Well, that's a
shame.
You
know, Mike, I think Martin Luther King had a particular affinity for connection to New Hampshire. Apparently once preached at a church in in Portsmouth.
All right.
And apparently maybe Coretta was the soloist at that service where he preached. And then he had that line in one of his last speeches. You knew about this, Jason, when he refers to about freedom ringing from the prodigious hills of New Hampshire.
Yes,
yes. We've got some nice hills here, but they're not the tallest in the country, and yet he picked out that reference. I think there was something particular he felt about New Hampshire, and at least I'd like to believe that. Anyway.
Well, I think this is one of the ways I always thought that coming to New Hampshire from Texas, there was some similarities in these states, and they are states.
Yeah, I was interested you say that. I'd like to.
They have
explain
down
that.
in their core a love of liberty and freedom, and I think. They have very libertarian spirits in both of those states, but I think there is a love of freedom that exists in New Hampshire that I think King could find that was able to actually put us later on very early, in 2008, we were able to fight for marriage equality very early on as one of the states in our country.
Indeed, the very first state to do it without a court order.
Legislative
Yes,
action.
yeah, to do it legislatively. Our fight for trans non-discrimination was called freedom.
Yeah.
Right. That we have something in us that appeals to us, and we draw right
In
out
your
for
fight, in our fight to end the death penalty,
it. Yes.
which we did by having to override a gubernatorial veto.
Yes.
I was in the legislature at that time, and there was no more proud vote I ever cast than to override the governor's veto. In his last term, he vetoed more than 70 bills.
What's the phrase, Bob? The arc of justice, the arc of history bends toward justice, and you've just ticked off 3 data points that prove that the arc of history is bending toward justice.
Well,
right here in Hampshire.
I think I can begin to believe that again. I wasn't so sure I could for the last 4 years.
Bob, can I jump in?
Oh, yes,
that?
please.
Because, it is Martin Luther King Day, and I'm so glad that Jason tied us in with the Black Lives Matter and the very active Black Lives Matter organizations that we have here in New Hampshire. I'm so proud because, we're very white here, and I'm glad that we have a sufficient base to have that kind of activism at last.
Yeah.
But I wish I could take credit for this, but I heard this comparison. You talk about Abraham Lincoln being inaugurated at the very beginning of what would become a violent insurrection. You have
he was inaugurated after several states had already passed secession.
Indeed, after the election, you have Woodrow Wilson coming in to office with a pandemic on his hands,
Which he never mentioned.
Franklin Roosevelt coming in to run the country in the middle of an economic depression, and Lyndon Johnson having to step up from the position of vice president during a time of racial reckoning and turmoil. And today, as you and I sit here and talk, Joseph Biden is stepping into every single one of those crises at one time. We got to pray for this guy. I ask everyone to pray for this president, whether you like him or not.
We all should want him to succeed, and we certainly do.
There is so much to do, Bob.
Yeah, so much to do. I mean, thank God we had a successful inauguration. So, Jason, let me turn this to you. The theme of Joseph Biden's inaugural address, which I thought was excellent, I must say, was
someday they're going to say, that Lincoln's second inaugural was good, but boy, Joe hit it out of the park.
Well, tough to beat Lincoln's second inaugural, but it was a good one.
I am here to tell you, I'm putting my $100 down on that.
I wanted to talk about his call for unity and to end the uncivil war we're in, and that seems to me, I just hope we can do that. How can the churches, how can the faith community help to end this uncivil war we are facing in this country amongst ourselves? I mean, I don't think there's any more urgent matter than that right now. I forgive me, I was on Fox for a little bit this afternoon just to see what they were saying. No let up. I mean, it was the same thing, These policies are all bad. He doesn't want to keep building the wall. That's bad. Blah, blah, blah. No let up at all. No honeymoon there at all. So, Jason, how can the faith community and you as a leader of it help us achieve the president's call to end this uncivil war between ourselves?
The first thought that comes to my mind is that this is something that we are all in together on. I know that our churches, our congregations and denominations are themselves split down the middle. There are people who are within our own congregations. I know many clergy have spoken about the challenge of trying to be on one side of the aisle and minister to people who are on the other. And it can be a challenging thing that this divide runs down our congregations as well as our whole nation. It runs through our families, as we learned at Thanksgiving, and we experienced there. So this is something that I would hope that our churches can be, in some sense, a microcosm of the larger national scene, that it can be a place where we can start to bridge those divides one-on-one, person-to-person, family-to-family. We can practice it in a safe place and build from there. I would hope, as in my role at the Council of Churches, that we start to find out part of the role of the council is unity, but without trying to compromise things that are absolutely essential to us. And there's some things that we just cannot ever sacrifice. I think there have been many times when we've tried to find a thin unity by sacrificing something. Billy Graham, for example, wanted to appeal to churches of all kinds. He wanted to be a uniter, but that meant that he would not speak up for racial justice. So he went for unity at the sacrifice of something very important, and we still feel that today.
I don't think today is remembered as a unifier at all.
No, not and the legacy bears that out.
Yeah.
But one of my board members on the Council of Churches used to run the Vermont version of the Council of Churches, and had been approached by a member of another denomination who said, "We can't work with you on this project. It's a charitable project, but we can't work with you." And he said, "Well, why? Why can't we work together?" He said, "Well, we don't agree." And my board member said back to him, "Well, that's the point. The point is we don't agree, and we're going to work together to make the world better." That there are things that we can find unity on and still do the work that needs to be done. That is the entire point, that Unitarians and Greek Orthodox and Baptists are not the same, and yet we will work together, we will find our unity without sacrificing the things that are at our own core that we can't give up. There's some things we can never give up on, but we can still find, as I think Mike was saying earlier, that there's that 90-95% where we can all agree on certain things without sacrificing those most critical justice questions.
What about the issue of immigration and how to treat the undocumented within us, which goes all the way from the so-called dreamers, the people who are brought here as children without any role in their being here. And, there's even an attempt by many to say they should be deported too, even if they've, paid their taxes, served in the military, whatever. They should be deported. To the others that are here that did knowingly come across the border against the immigration laws, which I am somewhat sympathetic for, say you wait your turn for legal immigration. There is no legal immigration for the vast number of people. If you don't have a skill we need or a lot of money, the wait is going to be longer than your lifetime. But that's an issue that seems very, very fraught. And how can we bring people to work together on this issue, for example? Is that an issue that the Council of Churches is concerned about?
Yes, absolutely it is. So immigration has been something that we have come together around very strongly. Again, like I said, around the death penalty, just about all of our denominations in the Council of Churches have a positive, supportive role in the immigrant solidarity and support movement here in the state. In fact, New Hampshire, I find our immigrant solidarity movement is strongly faith-based, more so than some other states.
I do perceive that myself with the what do they call it? The Jehovah's
the Jericho Walk that we do outside of the ICE offices.
Outside of the ICE offices here in Manchester. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that. Many people who are in our country, if they're here and if they're undocumented, many of them are taxpayers. They often serve in the military. They have jobs, and even some of them are business owners. But one thing that I think is important to remember is that many of them are members of our faith communities. They are church members.
Yeah.
I have met personally with people who, at the ICE office, they are under threat of deportation. They are summoned to come and answer to ICE a few days after they were at their church on Sunday morning reading the Bible for their congregation out loud. Right? These are people who are not just constructive members of our broader society, but they have a living faith and are practicing it in meaningful ways. And I think that's one place where we begin, is to remember, first of all, that our faith requires us, especially those of us who look to the Bible and the Hebrew Scriptures, which tell us if there is a foreigner in your land, you must treat them the way you would treat your own family.
Yes, that's a very strong message.
It is absolutely must. And that these are people who are in our own faith communities. Out on the seacoast area of the state, there's a large Indonesian population, some of whom are here as asylum seekers from Indonesia. And there are Indonesian churches that are Lutheran. There's an Indonesian Lutheran congregation, a Presbyterian congregation, an Indonesian Congregationalist church, and one which is Foursquare Gospel, an evangelical denomination. So even among the Indonesians, there are at least 4 or 5 faiths represented among us. So we should remember.
Now, the members of your council, the 9 denominations, are they agreed on this message that you're giving us now? I mean, is there a division there?
There is really no division here. This is something where all of these denominations provide support. We have 3 churches in our state, each one of a different denomination, who are sanctuary churches. They would be willing to take in a person under threat of deportation. This is something that just about every church is a supporter of, and many of our churches certainly know that there was a time when they were the immigrants, the Scandinavian Lutherans, the Greek Orthodox. They remember the times when they were the immigrants to our country, and it was not that many generations ago, and that we ought to do unto others as we
And it
have
goes
done
back to
unto
the
us.
pilgrims themselves, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, and of course, as an Episcopalian, Presbyterians and Episcopalians were among those who were the first colonists. I don't know if immigrant is quite the precise term, but
that's a little iffy.
yeah.
So
they were the ones that got to pull up the drawbridge and say no more.
Well, that is an instinct among many here. Yeah.
Mike, I think I might, if it's okay with you, just take a quick break. I didn't tell you this, Jason, we usually take a couple quick breaks. I want to get something from the green room I brought in. I don't want to lug it down here and not display it, and then we'll come back, and I've got some more things I'd like to discuss with Jason.
Well, Bob, I've got something I'd like to put up on the screen too, really briefly, when we come off this break too. So maybe we can do that.
Okay.
All right.
Serially.
All right.
Folks, in the Union Leader today, a wonderful person here from New Hampshire. Now I can't think of her name, but she said, they say if you're a devout Muslim, you should at least once in your lifetime try to get to the Hajj in Mecca. And she said if you're an American citizen, you should at least once in your life try to get to a presidential inauguration. And I did in 1993, the first Bill Clinton inauguration. There he is with his saxophone. The rooster's crowing, the sun is rising. I just thought it was a great thing, and he signed it and the artist signed it. So, in honor of honor today. I had to take that off my wall and bring it in and show it to you folks. And I absolutely agree. Anybody, if you can do it, if you can get to a congressional, it's a congressional event, but a presidential inauguration, and we get past this COVID and we get past this frightening attempt to attack our democracy by, political anarchists. I certainly think you would never regret being part of an audience in an inauguration.
Well,
it is
I love
a
it.
celebratory
My
event.
Kathy,
Huh?
My wife Kathy attended Barack Obama's second inauguration and brought me back a hat.
That's just as good. And my daughter Jillian attended the first inauguration
Presidential seal
and was
on
so
it.
far back on the mall that nobody could have seen her and she couldn't see anybody, but she was glad she was there. And they had the
yeah.
Jumbotron, so she was part of it. And
Hey,
it's
if I
just
can
it's
jump
just a
in,
wonderful thing.
You brought up a picture, Brendan. If you could put up that file that I sent over to you, Bob. Tell me when it's up.
Oh, I think it's there.
It's there. As I've already mentioned, I'm an Irish Catholic, and we have a quirky little tradition that came about in the early 60s. A lot of Irish Catholic kitchens will have hanging on the wall a picture of the Pope and the President. And of course, it's John F. Kennedy is the Irish Catholic president that's always there. And I've tried to keep that tradition. That's a picture of my kitchen. In my kitchen, I have hanging a photograph of the Pope, and if it's a Democratic president, I put up the president's picture, but if it's a Republican, I put up Kennedy. So I'm very happy that I will be taking down JFK, saving it for in case I need it, but I'm going to put up an official portrait of Joe Biden in my kitchen very soon, and I'm very happy to be able to do that.
I'm very happy you were able to do it too. I think that's just wonderful. That's great, Mike. That's just great. Well, we're feeling good today. We really are. So one of the things that's bothered me, and I mentioned this to you before we came on the air, Jason, you can take a crack at this if you want. It's bothered me that so many people that call themselves Christians fully supported the Trump agenda, despite his own character flaws, which are, unbelievable that somebody with those flaws could have been elected president of the United States. And it was all about the fact that he was going to promote their agenda of appointing very conservative judges, which he did, including 3 Supreme Court judges who could be confidently relied on to end legalized access to abortion in this country.
A single issue, Bob.
Huh?
Single issue. It's a single issue.
It's a single issue, but it was important enough so that a substantial part of the Christian community, these people are Christians, at least they claim to be, diverted and forgave him all his character flaws and the grift and everything, the lies, to be his supporters through thick and thin. Got any comment on that, Jason? You got thoughts on that?
Are you going to throw me a softball here?
Yeah, just an easy one. What's wrong with the Christian community?
Right. I think a couple of thoughts. We do recognize from the polling data, we know that in 2016, among evangelical Christians, 80% of them voted for Donald Trump. That was an overwhelming majority of the evangelical wing of
what does
Christianity.
evangelical Christian mean? I mean, what is it actually about? I think of the evangelists, the people who brought went forth to spread the gospel.
Yes, yeah, and evangelical is a very difficult term to define. It is often very much a label of self-identification that people say it about themselves, but it doesn't mean that you belong to a specific type of church or denomination. Even trying to come up with a checklist of particular beliefs or commitments is often very elusive. It's a hard sort of thing to crack. But it has in many ways some very uniquely American manifestations, which is part of what I would hope to say is that it exists in this sort of religious and political atmosphere in ways that it does not exist in other countries. That the idea of being an evangelical in England or Germany or another country does not have the same sort of pro-life that fusion that we have here. So there's something very uniquely American about it. And when you see world Christianity, it's not there.
Mike, go ahead.
I would postulate, with all respect, that particular wing of the American church was born out of the conclusion of the Civil War. And I believe history would bear me out if you were to look as to when that movement arose and when those churches were founded, and the current churches directly tie back to the resentment in the South over the consequences of losing the Civil War.
Well, you think about that split, in the Civil War split the largest Protestant denomination in the country then, and maybe even now, the Baptists, right down the middle, between the Southern Baptists and the Baptists in the non-slave states. And even today, I think the Southern Baptists are probably the largest Christian Protestant denomination in the country, are they not, Jason?
Yes, usually considered the largest evangelical denomination. The largest sort of mainline or progressive Protestant denomination would be the United Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. But both of those, and many others, the Presbyterians, most of those denominations, as Mike was getting at, had a north-south split, that there was a Southern Baptist church that still exists. The Baptist Church of the North is today the American Baptist denomination. I attended college in Dallas at Southern Methodist University. That was a product of the Southern Methodist Church, and retained that name long after that sort of historical period passed. But we've seen the period after Reconstruction, as Mike was talking about. I think there's also been a movement following the Civil Rights Act and the move to desegregate our country and our schools. I've read several accounts telling how the move to create so many Christian schools and the Christian homeschool movement started as a reaction against desegregating our schools, that it was a white Christian movement to create schools for white Christians so they did not have to integrate the ways that public schools were doing. Mm-hmm. So there was a movement created out of that.
I want to jump in and add to that we also saw that manifested in South Boston, among the white Catholics of South Boston.
The busing controversy.
So, I mean, in order to be fair, I have to glom that on to what Jason was just saying.
Yeah.
It was throughout the country.
As a person who lives in New England but came from Texas, we can't just push everything down south as a problem. We have to be able to recognize it in our own house.
A lot of us like to do that, but it's not right. It's true.
And we should remember that New Hampshire was a slaveholding state.
Right.
That Portsmouth, the Black Heritage Trail, the good work that Jerry Ann Bogus and others do there, will remind us that New Hampshire has a bad racial history, a harmful racial history, and
if we didn't own slaves, we had many people who made their fortune by, financing the slave trade.
Yeah, and this is a place where I actually hope to bring it back to the faith conversation. That I know there are churches in Rhode Island as well as in Portsmouth. Churches that have recognized that in times past the clergy of those churches were slave owners. Then there are trying to do some of the deep soul-searching work of what does that mean that the fact that we are a large, well-endowed church now, that wealth was built on slavery, that wealth was built on a racialized past that we now have to reckon with and deal with and learn how to make right and make reparation for.
Yeah.
It's something that is soul-searching work, to get back to where we were earlier in the program.
Yes, soul. Soul. Here's another subject I might broach with you, Jason, if it's okay. A lot of people are seeing that the United States, like most of Western civilization, I guess, is becoming more secular in a sense. I mean, the mainstream churches are struggling to maintain their membership, and some of the more conservative evangelical churches are, thriving. But a lot of the churches that follow the more mainstream teachings of Jesus, like the goal is not to become as rich as you can, the prosperity gospel, so-called, are struggling. What do you think is behind that? And is the Council of Churches is part of what they're doing to try to turn that around and get people to not just drive by the church and not even look at it, but come in and go to service.
Yeah, I think in some ways, another massive question that has a lot of dimensions. I think it is one message I always like to bring to the churches, to the Christians, especially here in New Hampshire, is that there is often an attitude that looks to blame other people for not coming to our church. Right, that it's their problem for not coming, and if they were just a little more right, they would be coming here. But rather to do that soul-searching question of asking, why have several generations lost confidence in us? Yeah. Where is it that we were complacent? Where was it that we stood up on the wrong side of history and need to make those amends and reparations? And one thing I often tell churches to do is to consider for themselves, what are the alternatives that are out there? Because some of them are actually really good alternatives. They're not bad things. I think people have a hunger for, I think, one of two things, and this is one of those soul questions, is that people want to have an experience of God, and they want to make a good, positive difference in the world. And there are a lot of ways people will have that experience of God, and they might not be having it in church. They might be having it on a hike. They might have it while skiing.
I've heard people say that.
They might have it at a yoga studio. There's a lot of ways that are competitors in that, to use sort of capitalist language, to where we have that experience of God. And there are many places to make a positive change in the world. In fact, I think for many people, the last place they would look to make a positive difference in the world, the last place they would look is a church.
Really?
They might rather go to help a homeless shelter. They might rather work with Black Lives Matter. They might rather work on an environmental movement to make a positive difference in the world. But those two things, to have spiritual experiences and to serve the world in a positive way, corresponds very closely to the commandment to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. The great commandments of the New Testament.
But Jesus also said, "When 2 or 3 are gathered in His name."
Yeah.
If you're doing it, if it's just you and the mountain you're hiking up or the beach you're walking on, that's not it.
Yeah. Well, sure. Yeah, but I do think that if our churches started to look into, if that thing that happens for that hour on Sunday morning, are we having an experience of God, a spiritual experience there or not? Some people might reflect that they really don't have their best experience of God there every week. But if we were able to supply that, if we were able to supply and be trusted as a way to make a positive difference in the world, I think we would see a lot of people giving Christianity another look. And I'm thinking of the number of people I have heard because they've heard from Pope Francis, Michael. They've heard something from Pope Francis. It means they're giving Christianity another look when they really had given up on it. Yeah. And he's starting to speak in a way that is making people think twice. And if we can bring that kind of thing home, I think that will go a long way to changing the future of Christianity in our country.
So I'm going to ask you a very personal question, Jason, which you're free to ignore if you want to. Have you ever struggled with the faith you now profess yourself? Have you ever been a doubter of your own faith?
Certainly have. Yes. I can't say that I've never had any doubts in my life, and we're a live show, aren't we?
We are.
So I can't back out of that now.
Yeah.
But absolutely have. Yes. I grew up as a Christian. My parents raised me certainly within the church, and I certainly had a number of experiences in my life where I had walked away from that faith, where I did not believe it, where I certainly was, like many a teenager, dragged to church on Sunday, and I had no experience of God in that time. And I certainly saw many people who, by the time a person is 16 years old, they can smell the hypocrisy in another person.
Oh, real good.
Right. And I could do that too. That no teenager is fooled by someone who says that they want to live some way and they fall short or deny that. In
Boy, they spot that fast.
Oh yeah, the teenagers are the best detectors of that kind of BS.
Yeah.
But I certainly had those doubts in my own faith. and needed a space to walk away. And by the time I was in college, I found the Episcopal Church and had wound up founding a priest by the name of Barbara Kelton, an Episcopal priest. She was one of the first women to be ordained a priest in Dallas. Yeah. And she was our chaplain at the college and helped me sort of rediscover faith on my own terms for my own self, and was very patient in letting me have doubts and questions and kind of working those things through.
Well, thank you
those
for
things
sharing
take
that,
time.
because that's so personal,
life.
but I really appreciate your sharing that. What are the goals for the New Hampshire
Bob,
Council?
Can I just jump in and
Yeah, we're almost out of time,
thank
but
you.
we would like you to do that.
I just want to say thank you as well. I took a lot away from that revelation from you. Thank you, Jason.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome.
I was just going to say, and this won't be so personal. What are your goals, or the Council of Churches' goals for this next year? What are the major priorities you're going to be pursuing?
Right,
on
right.
behalf of the faith communities you represent?
Sure. So, I mean, we really have two major initiatives going right now, and a lot of that is around bringing churches together in the midst of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So very early on, churches, no matter what your denomination was, COVID does not care what your faith background is. So we were supporting churches in going online and giving them the governor's directives and helping them interpret those. And right now, our push right now is to help educate within the churches about the vaccines that are coming. Later this week, people over the age of 65 can register for the vaccine.
Starting Friday.
Go to vaccines.nh.gov is my message to find out where you fall into those phases. But
Me.
Yeah, you might know that there are many people in our churches over the age of 65. So that's a message we want to get out, and we want to give good, trustworthy information about the vaccine through the trusted networks of churches. So that's one area that we're spending a lot of our time. And the other area actually is ongoing interfaith work in New Hampshire for anti-racism. So the Council of Churches in our denominations have been working with the Director of Public Policy in the Catholic Diocese, with leaders in the Jewish Federation, the Jewish Clergy Association, the Islamic Society. We actually held 2 Zoom workshops lately on racism in New Hampshire. We had a panel discussion talking about the governor's COVID report, and we'll have another one coming up very soon. So if people go to nhchurches.org, we'll soon be talking about how we deal with racism as it exists in New Hampshire, not the South, not in Texas, the way it is here, and how do people of faith recognize we are our brother's keeper and uphold that value.
And with that, we've run out of time.
Right.
It always goes very fast. I have a lot more I would like to talk to you about, Jason, so maybe we'll have to have you back. But thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. I think this is a really terrific discussion, very appropriate for this day of renewal and hope with our inauguration of our 46th president. Prayers for him, please, from everybody, and for the vice president as well. Mike, take care.
Thanks, Bob.
You're my buddy. Take care. See you next week, folks, with another edition of the Progress Report.